good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all. So last time it was the question of interconnectedness and yet having interpersonal boundaries. This word interconnectedness and this word boundaries that both you probably hear a lot of. In Buddhist circles, it's interconnectedness. In healthcare or in more professional settings, that word boundary is used a lot. So I wanted to prepare based on the sutras, based on the teachings. What does Buddhism say about this? So I prepared quite a bit and I found that, wow, prepared kind of a lot. This could be potentially like a 2-hour Dharma talk kind of presentation. That would be way too much for our group since we only have an hour and a half for not only my part to present something and then discussion. So um, I want to present the teachings, but at the same time, I don't want to give you too much and overcomplicate something, which can actually be seen as very simple. Um, Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy can be quite complicated, can be really complicated, and there can be discrepancies among different traditions of Buddhism. So if you were to dive deeply into all of these concepts that we're going to look at today, it can be incredibly complicated and it can make our minds more busy the more we study and learn. And if that's the case, I think that goes in the opposite direction of the spirit of Buddhism, especially the spirit of Zen or Chan, which is simplicity. Chan takes the complication of Buddhist philosophy and simplifies it. Chan or Zen methods are also simple compared to some of the methods of uh, certain traditions of Buddhism. The methods themselves can be complicated. So, just before we begin, to remember that the spirit of simplicity, the Buddhist teachings, Buddhism in general is about being wakeful, about being aware, self-aware, self-aware in a way that we don't attach to ourselves. Simply aware of moment to moment what we experience in life and moment to moment being free from attachment to life or to the things we encounter. So when asked how to practice, many Chan teachers would just say, it's just eating and sleeping. But eating and sleeping wakefully, without a mind filled with noise of self-centered concerns. And it's also a mind without the noise of even philosophical or existential concerns. So everything we're going to discuss tonight, let's study it in that spirit, simplicity and practicality. All of these concepts and theories just point us in the direction of how to experience a life of wakefulness and freedom. So to begin tonight, for the agenda, what we'll do is I'll briefly review the topic of last session, which was on diligence. Chinese is 精进. It's also referred to as right effort in Buddhism. And second, we'll discuss today's topic. I'll present something, and then we can discuss on the topic of interconnectedness and interpersonal boundaries. If we have time, we can touch upon the new topic which someone presented in a question about perfectionism. So last time we talked about right effort. And to put it simply, we could say that right effort in Buddhist practice is to apply ourselves to cultivate wholesome states and to avoid or stop unwholesome states. States of mind, states of speech, states of action. We cultivate the wholesome, we stop the unwholesome, and we practice in a direction towards freedom, freedom from suffering. The whole practice of being diligent, it's for the purpose of resolving suffering, which comes from our craving and our aversion and our attachment to all kinds of views and opinions. And when we resolve that, we find ourselves with much more loving kindness. And we find ourselves more naturally charitable and with less fixed views. We become more flexible, more malleable, and we still have opinions or ideas, but we're not so fixated on them. So with right effort, as we mentioned last time, right effort, we could look at it in different contexts. So in general, it's applying ourselves to the methods. What are the methods of practice? Well, in Buddhism, we have three main methods or three main categories, right? Discipline, meditation, and wisdom. So the three pillars or the three learnings of Buddhism. So we um, apply ourselves to these methods, and we need to do it in a skillful way. And what is skillful? Well, we could say it's the combination of diligence and wisdom, or we apply ourselves in a way which doesn't cause more suffering and helps to resolve it. And we said that we gave many different examples of how if we're too tight or too tense when we practice, then that leads to problems. If we're too loose or too lazy when we practice, that also leads to problems. So with diligence, we're looking for being diligent in just the right way. So what is just the right way? Well, if we are wise, that all depends on the conditions. So we said that wisdom is acting in accordance with conditions. We do what's right for the situation. The Chinese for that is 随顺因缘, which is literally like to follow and to be in accord with the conditions or the causes and conditions. So to make that more concrete, for example, with meditation, if we're mentally scattered when we're meditating, what would it be to follow the conditions or to accord with the conditions? Well, if we're mentally scattered, we need to apply effort to concentrate, right? If we're mentally scattered and we don't use a method to concentrate ourselves, how could we make any more progress with any kind of meditation? If, though, we concentrate and we develop and train our mind to the point where it becomes concentrated, it becomes unified, then do we still need to apply effort to concentrate? Well, at a certain point, we don't. We let go of the effort to concentrate. And at that point, our method would change. It would become a method of observation. We would use a concentrated mind, an already concentrated mind, to observe our body, feelings, thoughts, sensations, our whole experience, right? So in meditation, we need to use a method that suits our situation and apply effort, right? So that's diligence in the context of meditation, right diligence. What about daily life? So in daily life, an example of just the right amount of effort would be that we follow our routine, we follow our structure, a form of guideline to help us live a healthy life. There's usually some form of structure there, right? but we don't follow the structure in such a rigid way that it harms us. So, for example, if our typical structure is to wake up early in the morning and meditate or to exercise, but we get sick, either we're sick or maybe the day before we exerted ourselves even more than usual and we're really fatigued. So to wake up early in the morning at our usual time may not be so wise because we're not yet recovered. We're still exhausted. So to sleep later is actually diligent. Some people think, no, how could I be diligent if I'm sleeping later? I have to wake up at 4 in the morning or 6 in the morning. I have to do this. But if we accord with our conditions, if our conditions are that we're exhausted, we may need more rest. So being diligent in that condition is to sleep more until we're recovered. And of course, there are unique situations where we may have to go way beyond our usual capacity and really put forth a lot of effort. But then usually after that, we have a bit more time to recover. So, for example, as I said, I moved and it was really exhausting. I mean, every time we move, it's a surprise how much it takes to move all the stuff from one building to another and how much stuff we discover which we want to get rid of. It's a huge process. It takes a lot of time and there's deadlines. We rented a truck. We only have a day and a half or a day and a little bit to use it. So we had to really work hard to move everything on the truck and then off the truck in a short period of time. And it was exhausting. So that requires more effort than usual. And to be diligent, we really need to follow through what needs to be done. If we were a little bit too slow and we said, oh, let's just take it easy, let's just take our time, well, we could. We'd have to pay for another day for the truck rental. That would be a problem. So, of course, there are situations where we need to exert ourselves more than usual, but then we need to follow the conditions and more likely than not, recover. Really give ourselves time and space to recover. And that is being diligent. Someone mentioned something about study, and I just want to mention this here because we didn't talk about this much last time. In the context of the Buddhist practice of study, this is part of wisdom, actually. Wisdom has an intellectual side to it. Um, the practice of wisdom, which is sometimes called Bora or prajna. The word Bora comes from the Sanskrit word prajna. And there are different kinds of wisdom. There's the wisdom of the intellect, or it's literally translated the wisdom of words and language, 文字般若. Then there's the wisdom of observation, 观照般若. And then there's the wisdom of reality, or the wisdom of experiencing reality, 实相般若. So we need to use the wisdom of words and language first, the theory, in order to then know how to practice, wisdom of observation, which then leads to the result of wisdom or insight into the nature of things. So when we study, how much should we study? One person recently asked, or they stated, they realized how much they study. They study so much because they're motivated by perfection or perfectionism. So they feel that they can never study enough because there's just so much to learn. And they feel this pressure to be perfect themselves and to learn perfectly the material in order to then be able to teach or share anything with others. So they're pressured by this perfectionism to study, and it leads them to studying to the point where it's a bit exhausting. And their mind is full of information. Their mind is often churning all the knowledge that they were absorbing. And physically, the body is also tired because of that. So how much should we study? Should we study to that point, study to the point of exhaustion, or study Dharma to the point that our mind is noisy with Buddhist terminology? Of course not, because that's causing ourselves more trouble, and in a way, it's causing ourselves harm. So when we study, it's important to study just the right amount. What's just the right amount? It's different for everyone. Some people, they could sit down and read a whole chapter of Buddhist teaching and read for an hour, and it flies by. Feels good, time flies, they read it, they feel nourished, and they feel inspired to go practice. Other people read 5 minutes and they're already losing their attention because it's just too much. It's a lot of information and some of it's complicated. So just the right amount for that person could be under 5 minutes. Just read a page, a section, a couple pages, and that's enough nourishment that you don't end up distracted, you don't end up feeling pressure to keep going, and you also have some inspiration and some knowledge to help inform your practice. So it's diligent, either 5 minutes or 1 hour or many hours. It's all diligent if it suits our condition. So this is a review of right effort, diligence that we spoke of last time. If you want to look into that in terms of specific references from the sutras and shastras, you can look in the Pali Canon, the books by Bhikkhu Bodhi. Bhikkhu Bodhi, he translated most, if not all, of the Pali Canon, which has a lot of reference to right effort. And then for a Mahayana perspective, there's a teaching called the awakening of faith in the Mahayana, 大乘起信论. And it also talks about diligence from another angle. And the book that I mentioned called The Hoofprint of the Ox by Master Sheng Yen. Chinese is Niu Di Yin Qi. That book is an excellent overview of not only theory, but also practice and emphasizing the Chan tradition. So you could either read it for hours or you could read it section by section. It's many smaller sections to read and digest. Okay, so let's talk about the topic of tonight, interconnectedness and interpersonal boundaries. Question is somewhat like this. How do we live in the spirit of interconnectedness, meaning there's no boundary between us or any other being, yet still maintain healthy interpersonal boundaries? One seems like it's talking about there being no boundary, the other talking about solid boundary. Seems contradictory. Well, the simple answer, or the simple way to resolve this conflict, is that because we are all interconnectedness, it's precisely because we're all interconnected that we need clear interpersonal boundaries. So because we're all just regular folks and we experience mental troubles, we experience all kinds of problems, we're sensitive, we're easily affected by things. So boundaries actually protect us, protect each other from trouble and harm. That's just, I think, the way things are. Although the ideal of Buddhism is that if we truly understood our interconnectedness, we wouldn't need any specified boundaries. We wouldn't need any guidelines on how to relate to each other. Because if we were all wise and wakeful all the time, we would be clearly aware of the sensitivity of everyone, and we wouldn't do things that harm or bother others. At least we wouldn't be driven by craving, by anger, or by some sort of ideology to affect someone else and harm them. We would just naturally realize that everyone is sensitive and to be respectful and to be aware of everyone's feelings. So, a truly wise person, as it said, is beyond ethics. And even in the Chan tradition, it says that a person with stability and wisdom, they naturally uphold the precepts, or they naturally abide by the discipline of Buddhism. But the reality is that we're not completely wakeful, and we have a lot of things that drive us to bother other people, to interfere with them, and crossing these boundaries. So I'd like to spend a little bit of time on first defining things as usual. To start with interconnectedness, where does this come from? This word is used a lot, especially in modern presentations of Buddhism, but there is no such a word really in the Buddhist sutras or shastras. Interconnectedness, this is a modern term. This comes from a core concept of Buddhism called, the Sanskrit is pratitya samutpada, or dependent origination, right? Chinese is yuanqi. This is the core concept of all forms of Buddhism. This is what makes Buddhism Buddhism. Um, this yuanqi, or dependent origination, there's many different phrases that have been used to translate this term. Interdependence, dependent co-arising, dependent origination, conditioned origination, and even interbeing is another more modern term. If you heard that, Thich Nhat Hanh, Yixing Chanshi often used that term of interbeing. Um, it's also related to the term conditioned arising and ceasing, 缘生缘灭. This is a teaching that uh, the Buddha stated is just the nature of every single phenomenon, which is every single thing cannot be by itself. There's nothing anywhere that can be, that can come about, exist, or disappear just because of itself. The phrase that he used to capture this concept is, this is because that is, right? This is not because that is not. The Chinese is 此生故彼生，此灭故彼灭. This is because that is. This is not because that is not. And it doesn't just refer to two things. It's not saying A is because of B, just these two relying on each other. But any one thing relies on a multitude of other things. And just to use a very simple example in the natural world is a tree, which is my favorite example of this concept. A tree, although we have a name for it, could never come about by itself, exist by itself, or disappear because of itself. Could it? A tree. Um, a tree, where does a tree come from? Well, a tree, of course, comes from a seed. It's a seed from a previous tree, which ends up in the ground, or actually maybe it ends up in the crook of another tree where there's a little bit of soil and it can grow on another tree. In the city, trees can even grow in the crack in the sidewalk, but they depend on some form of soil nutrients in those soil, water, the sun, different elements in the air even. And there are some trees that need certain bacteria to grow, which is kind of fascinating. The trees need certain bacteria um, and microorganisms in the roots in order for the tree to grow properly. So there are all these different conditions that give rise to what we call tree. And for it to sustain itself, it needs all these conditions. Oftentimes, if any one condition is missing, then the tree doesn't exist. The tree is just pulled out from the ground by its roots. Usually it dies very quickly. Or if the tree is either starved of water or flooded with water, it can also die. So this dependent origination or conditioned arising, conditioned ceasing is just the basic principle of everything. But in Buddhism, the purpose is not just to analyze phenomena and come up with some philosophy about the universe, but the purpose of Buddhism is, of course, dealing with suffering and resolving it. And so dependent origination actually focuses on the dependent arising of suffering and also how suffering can cease. So the teaching of dependent origination regarding suffering, you'll find a lot of that in the Agamas and Nikayas, which probably the most representative teaching is the 12 links of dependent origination, right? 十二因缘, or 十二缘起, 十二因缘. And it just describes the process of suffering coming about because of certain conditions. And what's the most essential condition for suffering to come about? Why do we suffer in the way that we do? What's the first link or the first cause? Anybody know? Yeah, Michael typed in ignorance. What is ignorance?
Like not seeing things as they actually are, or not seeing clearly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what are things as they are? How do we know? Because I see things one way, and maybe Ivy sees something a different way. Grace sees it a different way. John sees it a different way. And we all say, "Oh, this is how it is." And we say, "No, it's not. What are you talking about?" This is how we argue with each other all day. We argue over little things and we argue over huge issues. We all feel we see things as they are, but what is that? So Buddhism points out that things as they are is um, is not just referring to a description of phenomenon, but actually the nature of things, the nature of phenomenon. Everything, no matter what it is, it's impermanent. Everything, no matter what it is, it's selfless, which is actually also dependently originated. Everything is constantly changing, and everything depends on everything else in order for it to be. If we don't see that about phenomena, and we only see our own opinions or our own thoughts about things, that's when we get caught. That's when suffering begins. I could say the primary cause of suffering is this lack of awareness of our own perception. And that leads to the craving or aversion and all the other kinds of afflictions and problems that we find ourselves stuck in. So The 12 links start with ignorance and describe the whole process of suffering. It's basic Buddhist psychology. And so this is the core of dependent origination. But then we have later on teachers like Nagarjuna who not only talk about the process of suffering as being dependently originated, but all phenomenon, everything, including suffering itself, as well as wisdom, as well as nirvana, which is often a description of the goal of Buddhism. The extinction of suffering and the experience of a state of freedom and liberation, it's also conditioned. Suffering is not a thing, wisdom is not a thing, nirvana is also not a thing. So Nagarjuna uses this concept of dependent origination and applies it to everything, and even applies it to Buddhist teaching so that we don't get attached to ideas of nirvana or ideas of suffering. This is a deeper look at interconnectedness. The very, could say one of the most popular phrases of Nagarjuna's teaching to talk about dependent origination, as well as to talk about emptiness, this concept we often come to each time, is this: whatever phenomena is dependently arisen, that's said to be empty. It exists only as a designation, or it exists only as a name. This is the meaning of the middle way. The Chinese is 因缘所生法，我说即是空。意为假名，意是中道。So Nagarjuna takes this focus of conditioned arising from suffering and extends it to all phenomena, even all Buddhist concepts. So it's helping to break apart the idea that samsara or ordinary beings are opposite to nirvana. Actually, ordinary beings, liberated beings, are interconnected. And we could also say that an ordinary being is also a Buddha from this perspective. It's not that we're an ordinary being first and somehow we transform and we turn into a Buddha, or we have to die first and go someplace else to be a Buddha. This is just pointing out that our own suffering or our very own experience of all of our psychological troubles are the material for wisdom. All of our problems of being this sentient being or ordinary being, this is the material for us to be Buddhas. So suffering and wisdom are interconnected. They're interbeing, because without suffering, how could we have wisdom? Without truly experiencing and understanding suffering, then how could we be wise? So Nagarjuna goes a step further in talking about interconnectedness of all phenomena, all experience. And then we could say the deepest kind of deepest expression of interdependence in Buddhism is maybe you could take a guess. The sutra is very well known for being this most advanced metaphysical expression of dependent origination or emptiness. It's very popular in Chinese Buddhism, as well as Chan. Anybody know?
Are we talking about like the Heart Sutra or?
No, that's not the one I'm thinking of. Heart Sutra would correspond to Nagarjuna's expression, everything being empty because it's conditioned. But there's an even deeper or more profound illustration of this concept. Anybody else? Another hint is
Diamond
there's,
Sutra?
say again?
It's Diamond Sutra?
No, Diamond Sutra also corresponds to the Prajna teachings, Nagarjuna's expression, or the expression of wisdom of emptiness. That's also Diamond Sutra, Heart Sutra. This is a teaching where there's a whole, okay, Lankavatara, good guess. There's some very profound things in there as well, for sure. There's a whole tradition of Chinese Buddhism based on this one sutra, and they hold it to be the highest or the most complete expression of reality.
I'll just keep throwing sutras out there. Platform.
No, Platform Sutra is a Chan teaching.
Agama Sutra?
No,
No.
those are the earliest or the most foundational teachings. One more try. One more try. There's a school of Chinese Buddhism named after this sutra.
Is a Heart Sutra a sutra?
It is. That was mentioned.
Lotus Sutra?
Good guess. There is a school of Chinese Buddhism that emphasizes the Lotus Sutra, but it's not named after it. One more guess. I feel like this Hollywood Squares. Do you remember that show? Because I could see everyone in front of me. It's an old show, but
I'm Bruce Villain.
okay. It's the Avatamsaka Sutra. Huaiyan Jing. There's the Huaiyan Zong in Chinese Buddhism. So the Avatamsaka Sutra expresses dependent origination or interconnectedness in the most profound way, or illustrates it in a very beautiful way. And I'd like to quote the line from the sutra. I don't remember the chapter offhand, but it refers to the jeweled net of Indra. Chinese is Intolo Wang. Intolo Wang. It's Indra's jeweled net. So in this jeweled net of Indra, as it says, it's this vast net, and every intersecting point in the net, there's a jewel. Maybe you could think of a spider web, right? Spider webs are these interconnected lines, right? And at every point in the web, there's a jewel. And in each jewel, it reflects all the other jewels. And in all the reflections of all the jewels, all the reflections are also reflected infinitely. Kind of like an infinite mirror. If you put one mirror behind and one in front, you just see the image infinitely until you can't see it anymore, right? So it's that infinite mirror effect, but it's in all directions, infinitely. Isn't that quite a profound illustration of how every phenomenon in this world, in this universe, is completely and constantly affecting all other phenomena? And if we look at people, we look at ourselves and the people around us, each one of us is like a jewel in this net, and we're all reflecting each other. Everybody here that's participating, I am reflected in your mind in a different way. All of you appear in my mind in a certain way. We're all reflecting each other, or we're all influencing each other every single moment based on what we say, what we do, even how we look or how we move. We could be affecting each other in a unwholesome way, which causes more trouble, more pain, or more suffering, or we could be influencing and reflecting each other in a wholesome way, which in this context, Buddhist context, is that wholesome refers to what leads towards freedom, not just good in a relative sense, but wholesomeness really leads to the freedom of our mind. So another phrase to capture this from the Avatamsaka Sutra is the all is in the one, and the one is in the all. 一即一切，一切即一. Right? So in one of us, all of us are present. And in all of us, one of us is also present. So this this kind of interconnectedness is probably the most deep or profound expression of it within Buddhism. This is the Avatamsaka Sutra, or Huayan Jing. Okay, so this is where this word comes from. I just wanted to take time to use a scriptural basis to bring the concepts, or to cite where these concepts come from. So it's not just me making these things up. And this is the definition or definitions of interconnectedness. What is the definition of a boundary? So the boundary that, when Megan was asking this question, I think she was referring to boundaries, or the word boundary is used in healthcare settings, such as mental health counseling or psychotherapy, or just professional settings, where, for example, within your company, you may have a company handbook, which spells out very clearly what are the boundaries within the workplace, right? What things can you use in the office? What things can't you use? How do we talk to each other in the office? How do we not talk to each other? Every time I joined a new company as a mental health counselor, we had to take all these different trainings. One of them was a sexual harassment training. Another one was discrimination or anti-discrimination law training, referring to our physical boundaries and our boundaries of speech. How do we interact with each other so that we don't, either intentionally or unintentionally, cause problems for other people? For example, some people don't even know that they're sexually harassing somebody else. Some people just, have a habit of like telling dirty jokes, for example. And maybe some of the people in the office kind of go along with it. They think it's funny. I had a client who talked about their experience working in a hospital. And they said that everyone in the hospital, not everyone, but many of the coworkers in the hospital have a lot of fun telling dirty jokes, and like super inappropriate jokes that you would be breaking all the rules of the sexual harassment training if you were to participate, but that was their thing. That's what they do in their break time, lunchtime, and just hanging out with each other. But not everybody enjoys that. And some people feel really uncomfortable with dirty jokes, or just comments about someone's appearance, or comments about, some sexual nature. So there are clear guidelines or boundaries of what can be said and what shouldn't be said in a workplace, for example, right? Because even if someone's not trying to hurt anybody else, the way they're speaking could really be affecting someone and making them feel uncomfortable. So, as I said in the beginning, all of us are sensitive in our own ways. And if we're unaware of other people's sensitivity, we could bother them, disturb them, and even harm them. So that's why these boundaries are made, because a lot of the time we lose our awareness. Especially if we heard that joke, we think it's really funny, we just can't help ourselves from sharing it with like one coworker, but we don't even realize that another coworker who hates these kind of jokes is behind us or next to us, right? If we had awareness, we would know what's the right place to tell that joke. If it was just the two workers who are friends and they love to tell dirty jokes, they're aware that nobody else is around, then it's fine. But we often lose awareness. We're often ignorant. We lose awareness of our surroundings. We lose awareness of other people's sensitivity, and that causes all kinds of problems. So, what about Buddhism? What does Buddhism have to say about boundaries? After all this talk about this limitless, infinite interconnectedness, this profound teaching of the conditioned arising of everything, Buddhism actually talks about boundaries. What way does Buddhism talk about boundary? You may not see that exact word, boundary, but there's a similar term. It's one of the most basic teachings of Buddhism. One of the three pillars.
Is it 贪嗔痴?
Say again?
贪嗔痴.
No. Craving, hatred, and ignorance. It's a practice. I'm referring to a practice. It's a category of practice. It's very obvious. Don't think too much. What in Buddhism do we teach so that we don't harm other people and we have specific, very clear guidelines? What's that called?
Didn't Kuan Yi say it? Precepts in there? Or,
Yeah, Grace typed it. 戒, precepts. Oh, okay. Kwang Yi also typed. Precepts, discipline. Precepts are the boundaries of Buddhism. 戒, I think literally that word 戒 means to stop. Precepts, many of them are what not to do. They're clear limitations on behavior. They're what not to do. And in some cases, precepts are what to do, right? They're what not to do to stop from creating harm. They're what to do to increase benefit and well-being. So the most basic precepts are what? The 5 precepts, right? No killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, taking intoxicants. But then you have the monastic precepts, which are much more detailed. And I would say, unfortunately, we don't, as lay people, have that much opportunity to study monastic precepts in depth. Some of them are, of course, in relation to us, they don't make any sense because we're not monastics and we don't live in a monastic setting in a monastery. But the monastic precepts are much more detailed boundaries to prevent harm from happening. And in many cases, they're very much likened to a sexual harassment training. What to say, what not to say, how to have physical touch in between people. Because as you know, or maybe you don't know, monastics are celibate. They don't have sex, or they don't have any sexual contact or intimate physical contact. Why? Not that that is ultimately bad, not that sex is wrong, but it's one of those things that brings about the most craving. One of the most difficult things to let go of craving for. So monastic precepts, many of them are about physical contact, or any kind of speech, or any kind of behavior that could potentially lead to physical contact, which then leads to sexual behavior, and then which could potentially, most likely, lead to all kinds of craving and problems. So, for example, monks can't touch women, nuns can't touch men. And you may say, well, what about people who are like bisexual or whatever? Um, in the Dharma drum tradition, which I was a part of, my teacher said that it doesn't matter who you are, just don't touch each other at all. Monks touching monks, nuns touching nuns, young touching old, it doesn't matter. Just don't touch each other um, in a kind of frivolous or pointless way, like among friends. We hug each other, we pat each other on the back, maybe just rub somebody on the back. It's a sign of affection. And for most people, that kind of affection is soothing, right? It can be soothing and have a healing effect. But monastics are training not for receiving affection from someone else to find soothing. They're trying to do it all by themselves, to heal without the need of affection or touch. So my Shifu would say, just don't touch each other, because it doesn't matter who you are. If you touch a little bit, you touch more, you start to like it, and then you get in trouble. You lose all of your awareness and you get lost in craving. So monastic precepts are very strict in this way, and the boundaries and rules are very detailed. Um, so this is an example of boundaries. And I think you can relate to it in the workplace because, yeah, as lay people, among friends and family, there's a lot of physical touch. Again, it could be different depending on the culture, different depending on your family. Physical touch is fine among friends and family members as long as they agree upon it, right? In the workplace, it's often pretty clear you don't go around touching people. You don't walk up to someone, especially that you're not close friends with, and just kind of rub their back. That's like clearly breaking the sexual harassment guideline in the training, right? So, this is boundaries in Buddhism. All of these monastic precepts are a really clear example of detailed guidelines for how to relate to each other, to protect each other from craving, anger, and losing awareness. But as lay people, what do? Because we don't have these precepts. We don't have the monastic precepts. We do have the bodhisattva precepts, but those are more general. They're not too detailed. They are a little bit more detailed in terms of speech, especially. And there was a topic, a Dharma talk I gave a couple of months back on speech. And if you're interested, I speak about the bodhisattva precepts and how speech can be used to create boundaries and protect each other. Uh, but apart from those, I think as lay people, we can establish our own boundaries and we can practice expressing what are our boundaries or what are behaviors that when we engage in them, we know that we cause trouble or we know that we cause other people trouble. And one thing that we can practice is actually communicating these things with each other. So especially with people you have closer relationships with, friends or family, that in many situations, it's important to express how we feel. When someone says something, for example, if someone says something that's a bit harsh, we maybe feel hurt by it, a common Buddhist reaction could be that, oh, we heard it, we felt it, we don't like it. Let me just use the method. Let me relax myself, focus on my breath, use my huatou, and try to deal with how I feel because so-and-so said something hurtful, right? Which is good. We practice dealing with our reaction by using the method. That's all good. But it can also be a practice just to express how we feel when we heard that person say something. If they called us a jerk or a fool or whatever word of choice that they usually use to call you, it's a kind of a practice to say, hey, I kind of feel hurt right now. I don't feel good when you say things like that. Does that sound like Buddhist practice? At first, maybe we think, well, we should just be able to take it, let it be like wind. Wind just comes and goes. We shouldn't be bothered by it. We can practice that, but if it really bothers us and we're not able to be unbothered and it causes us, it causes to damage the relationship, it's important to express it. Express how we feel and point out to the person what they said or what they did that we don't feel good about. It's different than attacking them and saying, "No, you're the fool. Look at you. And attacking them." That's different. That's a kind of malicious intent to get back, as if they stab us first, and we stab them back, and we just go back and forth stabbing each other with words. That's different. But saying, "Hey, just hold on a second. I feel really hurt when you talk like that." That is setting a boundary. And that is actually where two people or many people can establish a precept or establish a guideline that protects each other from harm and that nurtures the relationship. This is a common thing that we do in counseling and therapy, is helping people express how they feel to others as a way of setting a boundary, as a way to help everyone change their behavior so that it becomes more harmonious. There's another teaching which was developed for the monastic community within Buddhism, which is the 4 ways of harmonization. You could look that up a bit later. The 4 ways of harmonization. What's the Chinese? Anybody know offhand? I think it's 四和敬法, something like that. And this is a few guidelines that the Buddha set for Sangha members to live more harmoniously. It's 4 kinds of boundaries. Okay. So just to summarize now, this is interconnectedness and still having boundaries. From a metaphysical or ultimate perspective of reality, yes, all of us are interconnectedness. There's no solid boundaries between us. But at the same time, we can set boundaries, which is behavioral limitations. We can set guidelines so that we can interconnect in a healthy way. We could be interconnected in a harmonious way. We could also be interconnected in a very damaging and unhealthy way, right? So interconnectedness with behavioral boundaries leads to harmony. And that's how I see Buddhism's integration of these two seemingly opposing concepts. Thich Nhat Hanh would often just say something simple like, when I'm happy, it can make you happy. If you're happy, it can also help me to be happy. And this, of course, isn't just a happiness of being temporarily excited. It's a happiness of coming from training the mind, cultivating the mind. The more free and at ease we are when we interact with other people, they also can feel more free and at ease. And if we have clear boundaries and respect how other people feel, then our relationships are nurtured. And we mutually nurture each other. So from the Agamas, the teaching on interconnectedness is dependent origination. In Mahayana Buddhism, the earlier Mahayana, interconnectedness is described as emptiness. Later Mahayana Buddhism, interconnectedness is described as, well, interconnectedness, this web of mutual existence and mutual interrelatedness, coming from the Avatamsaka Sutra. So, Chan was supposed to be simple. It's a lot of words, a lot of concepts. But to bring it back home with simplicity, we can just experience this when our mind is stable and clear. We can live it when we're stable and clear. But I'd like to open it up to discussion now. With all that said, anybody have questions or even reflections after hearing this? Yeah, Michael?
Yeah, I guess like through meditation and like particularly Vipassana, gaining insight into impermanence, like I've found that helps me not attach too much to pleasurable feelings and not, react in violent ways to negative stimulus. My question being, are there any practices to kind of gain insight into Adavindra, to feel more connected and hopefully gaining some sort of passive compassion and feeling of connectedness so that I don't, instinctively take action that might negatively impact someone else?
Yeah, I think the practice of verbalizing what we feel appropriately. To really express what we feel and what we think, not just what we think, with the people we want to develop closer relationships with. And this is my own experience. Before I learned counseling and went to school for it, I really didn't know how to express my feelings, which it wasn't too long ago. That was only, how long ago was that? 9 years? 8 or 9 years ago? As a monk, I was trained in how to be self-aware, and use all these methods of meditation. And I learned how not to, use unhealthy speech. But we weren't trained on how to speak and verbalize what we felt. And maybe it was a cultural thing, but that led to problems. I didn't know how to express what I felt, and in many cases, people then couldn't understand me or why I was acting the way I was, right? And which didn't give them a chance to change. And I also felt miserable. I remember there was one brother monk who was really friendly. He's a really nice guy. And whenever he'd see me, he'd say, hey, he called me Abbot. He didn't speak English very well, but he knew this one word, Abbot. So he'd say, hey, Abbot. And at first it was nice. Yeah, it was nice to receive his friendliness. But after a while, it got annoying. Like he would say it all the time. And I was there, for example, in the bathroom doing my laundry, washing the clothes by hand. I wanted to use my method, just let go of everything and just do the laundry. And here you'd come in, hey, Abbott, and he'd want to talk to me and talk about whatever. And I would just get so angry because I didn't want to say, directly what I felt. Hey, listen, I don't want to talk to you. I just want to do the laundry. Get out of here. That wouldn't be nice. But I also didn't know how to say, hey, or say, hey, how's it going? But then say, hey, I hope you don't mind. I just want to be silent while I do my laundry. Or even if it's necessary, if it gets to a certain point, hey, I appreciate your friendliness, brother, but I feel bothered when I have to talk too much. So I just want to be silent and focus, right? So when we express ourselves like that openly to other people, this is what really makes the connections deeper and stronger. Because now we know not only what we're thinking, but what we're all feeling. And people feel more and more open and feel more and more connected, right?
And whereas insight into impermanence is something that can kind of be done in the vacuum of my body. Something like this with interconnectedness and gaining insight into others requires others.
Yeah, yeah. It's reaching out to others. And we can also express impermanence. We can say that I just felt a little frustrated there, but now I feel okay. So don't worry about what you just said. I'm all good. That's an expression of impermanence. George, where are you? There you are.
I was wondering if we express ourselves and what we say make others now, then how are we going to handle the situation?
It makes others what?
Feel bad.
Yeah, so that's possible. It's possible that even when our intention is not to hurt other people, they may feel bad. So, for example, that brother monk who came in and said, hey, Abbot, if I said, hey, brother, how's it going? Sorry, I just want to be silent and do my laundry if that's okay. At first, he may feel sort of like rejected, right? He could feel rejected because he was just trying to be friendly. But my intention was not to hurt him. And he also may have learned something. He may have learned that Chang Wen, which was my name at the time, doesn't like to talk when he's doing the laundry. So just leave him alone. Chang Wen will have more vexation if I go say, hey, Abbot, and pat him on the back. So he may feel a little bit rejected, a little hurt in the beginning, but he would learn my boundary that way. If he didn't feel anything, then maybe he wouldn't notice the boundary, right? So other people feeling bad, it could be good. Eventually, they won't feel bad. Eventually, they'll get used to our boundaries and they'll be okay with it. So feeling bad could be part of this process of making connection. We set a boundary. We say, this is when I talk, or this is when I like to talk. This is when I like to be silent. When other people learn that, then they learn how to relate to us better. And then both of us, or everyone involved, knows each other's boundaries and knows how to interact in a more comfortable way. So it goes from being maybe a little uncomfortable and awkward in the beginning, but eventually there's much more harmony because there's mutual understanding. Right? So it could include rejecting people. They may feel bad a little bit, but they'll learn the boundary. And it provides more opportunity um, to connect later when the boundaries are clear, because everyone feels safe when their boundaries are respected. So, can you see that? Or any follow-up question to that?
For me, it's when you were initially talking about boundaries, what came to mind was like knowing what's yours and knowing what's theirs. And I think the thing, that can be said for boundary setting. I like with my personal history, if I make somebody angry, that's something that's wrong with me every time, but that's not the kid, like I don't know what their conditioning is. Like I don't know what their past is. So maybe something that is totally wholesome for me is completely upsetting for them. But I can't take that personally if they get angry, you know. I can of course come to the table and communicate, hey, I noticed that when I said this, it made you angry. It wasn't my intention, and then maybe we can have a discussion on what exactly that was that made them angry. But
Yeah, yeah. So you're saying that you feel bad when you see someone else angry. You feel you must have done something wrong. And I think many of us feel that way, right? Um, what we can learn with this practice is that it's okay for someone else to feel angry about our boundary. It's okay because they really may not like it. But more often than not, it's good for everyone to uphold the boundary. So, the more we become aware of our own conditions and other people's conditions, we just follow the conditions or we adapt to the conditions. And if setting a boundary is appropriate, we just do it, even if other people may be angry at first. But it will actually help them because it helps them learn to respect our boundary and actually respect other people's boundaries. So if at work someone's used to telling dirty jokes and you're there, you don't like it, to say, "Hey, I don't mean to bother you guys, but I don't feel really comfortable hearing these jokes. Do you mind talking somewhere else?" At first, maybe they give you the face like, "Pff, oh, come on. What's your problem? Aren't you a Buddhist? Don't you meditate? Can't take it?" Yeah. Some people can really be pushy like that. Um, we could say, yeah, Sorry, I don't feel comfortable. Do you mind? And at first they could be angry, but you're actually protecting them at the same time that you protect yourself. Because if they tell dirty jokes with the wrong person in the room, that other person could go straight to HR. And that could be the end of their job. So we could protect them, even if they get angry, by raising their awareness to what they're doing. They could be more careful around other people and keep their job while protecting other people's sense of safety. So, for us people pleasers, this is a practice to set clear boundaries, even if people don't like it, as long as we know we're doing this with an intention that's to heal or to help. We're not trying to hurt anybody. We're just trying to protect, everybody. And the more you do it, you can start with an easier, smaller situation. The more you do it, the better you get at it, and the less you care about if the person is angry or not, as long as you know it's good for everyone. You don't get so caught up in trying to please people or being afraid of upsetting someone. And that's wisdom. We just do what's best for everyone, regardless of if people like it or not. 随顺因缘 is doing what needs to be done. So to respect everyone's boundaries, we should finish on time. Do you feel that tonight's session was useful? Yeah? Okay. Hopefully we can talk about both the theory behind these practices and the actual practices themselves, so we know where this comes from and then how to apply it. And we can be really simple when we do it. Can be simple. Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.